They called him the Prince of Manhattan, James Sinclair, a self-made billionaire whose life appeared to be drenched in gilded luxury and unparalleled success. Yet behind every dazzling charity gala and every flashy headline, a devastating truth lurked. His wife, Emily, had walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. Rumors swirled around their abrupt separation, whispers in elite corners speculating betrayal or scandal. But no one, not even James himself, truly understood why she was gone. When an unexpected clue falls into his lap, James embarks on an emotional journey to uncover the real reason Emily left, vowing to do whatever it takes to bring her home. James Sinclair was no ordinary man. From his penthouse in New York City's Upper East Side, he once viewed the world as something to conquer, an endless horizon of business prospects and philanthropic accolades. From boardroom negotiations that ended in multi-million-dollar deals to star-studded charity galas, James was accustomed to winning. For years, he believed that his dedication and ambition defined success. Little did he know that in the quest to build an empire, he had overlooked the fragile balance between love and achievement. He sat alone one humid summer evening. The glow of city lights sprawled across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Empty whiskey glass in hand, he stared at a single-framed photo on the marble side table, a snapshot from his wedding day. Emily was beaming in a white lace gown, her raven hair pinned back in an elegant twist, while he looked upon her with pride. That day represented the greatest triumph of his life, surpassing even his most extravagant business conquests. And now that memory haunted him like a cruel phantom, reminding him of the cracks in his outwardly perfect facade. Her departure had been swift and silent. There was no public meltdown, no messy tabloid expose. Emily simply left a letter on the kitchen counter one morning, in which she wrote, "I can't do this anymore. Don't come looking for me." The words weighed on him, echoing in his mind every night for the past 6 months. James was left to wrestle with confusion and heartbreak, searching for a rationale he couldn't fathom. His closest friend and right-hand man, Robert Patterson, once told him, "There's more to marriage than making money and paying for everything. Sometimes women need the simple things, your time, your attention, your vulnerability." But James had been so confident in the power of financial security that he never truly considered Emily's emotional needs. At least, that's what he told himself. On nights like these, however, he questioned if there was a deeper, far more painful secret behind her leaving. He picked up the phone to call her number for the 1,000th time. It went straight to voicemail, just as it had for months. He left no message, because what more could he say? He had already apologized in every imaginable way, offered to fly to any corner of the globe to see her. He had even enlisted the help of private investigator Harvey Wilkins to find out where she might have gone. But the reports came back inconclusive. Emily was determined to vanish from his life. Despite the heartbreak, James refused to completely relinquish the bond they shared. He had learned over the years how to fight for business deals until his knuckles were bloody. Now, for the first time, he would fight for his wife. The problem was, he had no idea why she really left, and that question was slowly consuming him. Before their love story unraveled, it had all the makings of a modern fairy tale. Emily Rose was neither a model nor a socialite. She was a compassionate freelance journalist, famed for her investigative pieces on social injustice. Meeting James at a charity event felt as though fate itself had orchestrated every moment. He, dashing in a tailored suit, had just pledged $10 million to a foundation fighting food insecurity. She, in a simple black cocktail dress, was there to cover the philanthropic side of New York's wealthiest. "Ms. Rose, is that correct?" James approached her after the press conference, his gaze genuinely curious. "Yes," she said, with a polite smile, scribbling notes about the foundation's future projects. When she looked up, their eyes locked, and an electrifying current coursed between them. James was used to superficial flirtation, but with Emily, he felt something wholly different. In their first conversation, he learned she wasn't impressed by his money. If anything, she was skeptical. She grilled him about how exactly his donation would be allocated and asked pointed questions about his business practices. Instead of taking offense, James was intrigued. For the first time, someone was genuinely challenging him, unafraid of his towering reputation or the billions in his bank account. Their whirlwind romance unfolded with an intensity that both exhilarated and frightened James. 3 months into dating, he whisked her away to a private island in the Caribbean. As they strolled along the shore, sipping mojitos, he brought up the idea of marriage, half-jokingly. She raised an eyebrow and said, "James, is that a proposal or an impulse?" He knelt in the sand, improvising because he hadn't even thought about a ring. "I'm serious, Emily," he said, his eyes glistening with both excitement and trepidation. "I can't imagine life without you." In that moment, Emily realized that beneath the stoic businessman's exterior was a man capable of extraordinary devotion. She said yes, tears of joy mingling with the foamy waves. They were married in an intimate ceremony at the St. Patrick's Cathedral in front of close friends. Robert Patterson served as James's best man, while Miranda Green, Emily's longtime friend, was the maid of honor. Everything felt pristine and full of promise. Emily loved James deeply. However, she also worried. Despite his outward charm, there was a guarded loneliness in him. He rarely spoke about his past or his parents, except to say his father was controlling and his mother was absent emotionally. Emily sensed that James's hunger for success was, in part, fueled by unresolved pain. She vowed to stand by him, believing that together they could heal each other's wounds. Their marriage began in a golden haze of love and hope, but reality soon intruded. Between James's unrelenting schedule and Emily's own investigation assignments, time grew scarce. Late dinners and midnight airport rendezvous replaced the spontaneous intimacy they once cherished. Emily's concerns about James's emotional distance began to surface, but each conversation ended with James promising, "I just need a bit more time." Neither realized that time was exactly what their relationship would run out of. 5 years into their marriage, the cracks began to show. Emily found herself in a constant tug-of-war between her professional commitments and an ever-growing sense of isolation. She was flooded with interview requests and had begun crafting a groundbreaking investigative piece on political corruption in the city. Meanwhile, James was consumed by a hostile takeover of a rival tech company. Weeks passed without a single leisurely dinner, let alone a romantic evening. Their schedules overlapped like misaligned jigsaw pieces. During an overdue lunch meeting with her friend Miranda Green, Emily finally allowed her frustrations to surface. "I don't know if I can do it anymore," she confessed, her voice trembling. They were seated in a cozy bistro off Madison Avenue. The hum of conversation and clink of silverware provided a surprisingly soothing background to her moment of vulnerability. Miranda squeezed Emily's hand. "Have you talked to James about how you feel?" Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "He promises things will change, but it's always the same. He either has to jet off to London for negotiations or is locked up in his office until the early hours of the morning. And when we do talk, it's about expense reports, shareholder demands, or expansions. It's never about us anymore." Miranda hesitated, then sighed. "I'm not defending him, but a man like James is under enormous pressure. Sometimes you have to drag them away from work to remind them of what truly matters." Emily tried. She truly did. She scheduled a weekend retreat in the Catskills, hoping that the serenity of nature might rekindle their bond. But James arrived a day late, consumed by a last-minute investor crisis. He spent the bulk of the time on conference calls, barely noticing the scenic lake or the cozy cabin Emily had meticulously prepared. When Sunday morning rolled around, he left before dawn, apologizing hastily about needing to catch the earliest flight back to Manhattan. Emily woke up alone, greeted by a cold note on the side table. "I'm sorry. Don't wait up." Behind all these disappointments, Emily sensed something deeper. James had always been guarded about his personal life. Over the years, she discovered glimpses of his tormented childhood. His father, Winston Sinclair, was a ruthless businessman, the type who would cut deals at the dinner table and drill into James the importance of wealth above all else. Emily suspected that James's relentless pursuit of business triumphs stemmed from his desire to outrun his father's shadow. It was both heartbreaking and infuriating to watch James replicate the same emotional distance he had loathed in Winston. Small arguments turned into vicious cycles of blame. Emily would question his priorities, and James would blame her for not understanding how business worked. Their once passionate affection was replaced by cold politeness or explosive fights. Only months before Emily left, she wrote in her journal, "I fear we've lost sight of each other. I miss the man I fell in love with." Yet the true reason Emily walked away went beyond neglect. In hushed corners, there were whispers, shocking, scandalous allegations that would shatter James's world if they proved true. And unbeknownst to him, Emily had caught wind of these rumors, forcing her to make the hardest decision of her life. 6 months after Emily's disappearance, James remained a shadow of his former self. His once perfectly coiffed hair had grown slightly unruly, and dark circles underlined his eyes. This was the man who used to stride into meetings with unwavering confidence. Now he was a question mark, his mind perpetually stuck on the last day he saw Emily, replaying every detail. Desperate for answers, James hired private investigator Harvey Wilkins, a retired NYPD detective with an impeccable track record for solving the unsolvable. A direct and unorthodox man, Harvey took the case with a shrug and a single statement: "No one vanishes without a reason." The day Harvey returned to James's office in the Sinclair Tower, James could feel his pulse hammering in anticipation. Harvey took a seat, meticulously placing a thick file on the glass tabletop. "I've got fragments, but nothing definitive," he began, removing his reading glasses. "Your wife, she covered her tracks well. No digital footprints, no bank movements that I can trace. If she's using money, it's unaccounted for, likely cash." James frowned. "She had access to several of my accounts. You're telling me she hasn't touched them at all?" Harvey nodded. "Not a cent. It's like she doesn't want anything to do with your finances." The revelation stung. The typical narrative in such situations was a gold digger walking away with a portion of her husband's wealth. But Emily, she'd left everything behind. James's heartbreak deepened. She hadn't just left him, she'd left the life they built. "I did find something else," Harvey continued. "She was in contact with a man named Robert Patterson shortly before she disappeared. Texts, phone calls, almost daily for about 2 weeks. Then after that, Poof. Nothing. James's expression darkened at the mention of his best friend. Robert told me he tried to reach out to her a few times, but he never said it was anything regular. Harvey tilted his head. Well, it appears they spoke a lot. Then the contact stopped the day she left. Might be worth talking to him again. Torn between mistrust and loyalty, James found himself in a bind. Robert was his confidant, the man who'd stood beside him for years. The idea that Robert might be hiding something unsettled him. Still, James realized there could be multiple explanations. Maybe Robert was just providing emotional support or helping Emily with some personal project. Anything else? James asked, bracing for more unexpected discoveries. Harvey flipped through the file and paused on a page. Remember those rumors about corporate espionage and your father's old dealings? I've heard mention that Emily might have stumbled across something big, maybe tied to Winston Sinclair's legacy. It's all hearsay for now, but these references come up in a few places. The timing is curious. James felt a chill creep down his spine. For years, he had avoided investigating certain corners of his father's empire. Winston's business tactics were questionable at best, and James had always feared unearthing skeletons that could taint his own reputation. But if Emily had found something truly damning, and it tied back to Winston, could that be why she left? A swirl of conflicting emotions overcame him: fear, betrayal, and a desperate hope that the truth might at least explain everything. Determined to uncover the truth, James arranged a clandestine meeting with Robert Patterson in a secluded lounge owned by an old acquaintance, Karen Davies. The lounge, hidden behind the facade of a vintage bookstore, had thick velvet curtains and dim lighting, perfect for a private, potentially explosive conversation. Robert arrived wearing a simple gray suit, clearly apprehensive. Once best friends, their relationship now felt strained. They sat at a small table in a back room, whiskey glasses between them. Karen discreetly locked the door, ensuring no one would disturb them. Without preamble, James leveled his gaze at Robert. Harvey found out you and Emily were in constant communication before she left. Why didn't you tell me? Robert sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I was trying to protect you. Emily was worried about something dangerous. She made me promise not to breathe a word until she decided what to do. James's jaw tightened. Protect me from what? I deserve the truth. Robert looked torn, his eyes clouded by guilt. Emily was investigating your father's old network. She had some leads suggesting that Winston Sinclair was involved in illegal arms deals decades ago. She discovered a paper trail linking some of his shell companies to violent regimes overseas. She believed it might implicate you, or at Lee. Robert rubbed his temples. She wasn't sure whether you knew any of this. In those last days, she was torn between confronting you and exposing the truth. She also mentioned that if the story broke, it could ruin your reputation, sink your businesses, and maybe even put your life at risk. She loved you enough to walk away rather than watch you get destroyed or be forced to turn you in. A searing pang of realization spread through James's chest. Emily's letter, I can't do this anymore. Don't come looking for me, could very well have been her attempt to shield him. James needed to understand whether Winston's shady dealings had forced Emily's hand, or if she suspected James himself was complicit. You should have told me, James said, his voice quivering with rage and hurt. If Emily was in danger, I could have protected her. We could have worked through this together. Robert exhaled slowly. I feared how you'd react. I feared you might lash out at your father. And Winston is not a man to be trifled with. Emily said disappearing was the only way to guarantee everyone's safety. She planned to contact me periodically, but that never happened. I'm worried, James. Something might have gone wrong. James's heart pounded. Emily could be in danger, and here he was, clueless for 6 months. No wonder her trail was so cold. She was running from more than heartbreak. She was running from Winston Sinclair's toxic legacy. And it was time for James to confront the man who shaped his life, for better or worse. Winston Sinclair was a name that inspired both awe and dread. In the early days of James's career, Winston had shown him no mercy, emphasizing that business was a battlefield. Emotions and ethics were seen as weaknesses in the elder Sinclair's eyes. Even at James's wedding, Winston had stood in the corner, politely congratulating the couple, but never fully endorsing Emily, who he considered a distraction from the real work. Now James found himself driving to Winston's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, a sprawling mansion nestled behind iron gates and tall hedges. The butler, ever the picture of polite formality, ushered him into the study. Winston sat in a leather chair beside a crackling fireplace, calmly sipping brandy. His father's eyes flickered with mild curiosity as James marched in. "Well, this is a surprise," Winston drawled, setting his glass down. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" James's voice was strained with contained anger. "What did you do to Emily?" Winston arched an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Don't play dumb," James snapped. "I know she found something in your old files, shell companies, arms deals. She was terrified that it would ruin me. Is that why she left?" The elder Sinclair rose from his chair, his posture radiating the same cold authority James had known his entire life. "Son, you've always had a penchant for dramatics. If your wife was digging around in places she shouldn't have, that's hardly my fault." James advanced, fists clenched. "Don't lie to me. Did you threaten her? Did you blackmail her into leaving?" Winston's lips curled into a condescending smirk. "I don't need to blackmail people. They usually realize on their own when they're out of their depth. If Emily was investigating my past, it merely shows her naivety. The business world isn't a fairy tale. Power doesn't come without a little dirt." James's mind spiraled with a potent mix of fury and dread. Winston wasn't outright confessing, but the implication was crystal clear. Any threat to the Sinclair name would be neutralized, and Winston had long proven he would go to extreme lengths to maintain his carefully curated facade. "Where is she?" James demanded, his voice tight with desperation. "If you know anything about her whereabouts, tell me." Winston exhaled audibly, almost bored. "What makes you think I'd know? If she's the one who ran, then she's the one who's gone. My involvement ends there." Staring at his father's emotionless expression, James realized the truth. Winston wouldn't hesitate to destroy Emily if it meant preserving the Sinclair legacy. As horror gripped him, James's mind flashed back to Emily's compassion, her investigative spirit, the quiet nights where she had read him poetry. All of it was overshadowed by Winston's looming presence, the very darkness James had tried to escape by forging his own path. "You'll regret it if something happens to her," James warned. "I won't rest until she's found." Winston didn't flinch. "You were always too soft." He reached for his brandy glass, taking a deliberate sip. "Best of luck, son." James stormed out of the study, the heat of rage and worry consuming him. He knew then that if Emily had discovered something truly damning, Winston would stop at nothing to protect himself. The question burning in James's mind was, how far would Winston go? And more importantly, could James save Emily before it was too late? That night, James couldn't sleep. The city lights that usually comforted him now felt like a garish reminder of the emptiness eating away at his soul. He tossed and turned in his lavish penthouse bedroom, thinking of Emily's haunted gaze the last time he saw her. The silence in the suite was absolute. No muffled voices from the hallway, no distant hum of conversation. Nothing but the ringing in his ears and the pounding of his heart. In the early hours, he rose from bed, unable to bear the darkness any longer. Slipping on a silk robe, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan's iconic skyline. There, against the backdrop of neon billboards and skyscraper silhouettes, he pressed his forehead to the cool glass and recalled the letter Emily had left. "I can't do this anymore. Don't come looking for me." The memory stung as sharply now as it had the day he found it. 6 months of sleepless nights and unanswered questions had led him to the brink of desperation. His phone buzzed on the marble countertop, jolting him from his daze. It was Harvey Wilkins, his private investigator, providing a cryptic update. "I've got another lead. Call me first thing." James felt a surge of adrenaline. Harvey wouldn't reach out so late unless something vital had come to light. He inhaled a steadying breath, trying to reassure himself that maybe, just maybe, they were inching closer to the truth. At dawn, James phoned Harvey. The investigator's gravelly voice carried an air of guarded excitement. "I've been pulling strings with old contacts at the NYPD and even reaching out to some federal folks under the radar," Harvey explained. "There's talk, just whispers, of certain documents that tie Winston Sinclair to off-the-book arms deals in conflict zones overseas. If Emily stumbled onto those documents, that might be why she went into hiding." James's heart clenched. He had always suspected Winston's methods skirted the line between aggressive business tactics and outright illegality. His father's empire was vast, with countless shell companies scattered around the globe. Even so, James had never seen tangible proof. Until now. "You're sure about this?" he asked, voice tight with anxiety. "As sure as I can be without the actual files," Harvey replied. "But it's enough for me to keep digging. In the meantime, I suggest you take another look at places you and Emily shared. She may have left a clue behind." James's thoughts drifted to the townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, a quaint property they once called home. It had been their cozy sanctuary early in their marriage, before the whirlwind of corporate success whisked them into a different stratosphere. Could Emily have returned there, or at least hidden something there? By mid-morning, James found himself driving across the Brooklyn Bridge, the steel cables arching overhead. The last time he made this trip, Emily was in the passenger seat, flipping through one of her beloved poetry books and quoting random lines that made him laugh. Those carefree days felt impossibly distant. Arriving at the townhouse, he unlocked the front door with a spare key. The sight inside immediately plunged him into a torrent of memories. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that trickled through half-drawn curtains. The bare wooden floors creaked underfoot, echoing with ghosts of laughter and whispered confessions. Back then, they had dined on cheap takeout in this very living room, content in each other's company. Room by room, James searched for something, anything that might give him a lead. He checked drawers, old boxes, and even the crawl space beneath the stairs where they used to store winter coats. Nothing stood out as obviously significant, but he refused to abandon hope. Finally, in the master bedroom closet, he spotted a stack of old cardboard boxes labeled with Emily's handwriting. Carefully, he peeled the tape from the topmost box, revealing keepsakes from their early years, photos from a Mediterranean vacation, ticket stubs from off-Broadway shows, and a framed collage of small notes they had written to each other. A lump formed in his throat at the bittersweet reminder of how beautiful their life together had once been. Digging deeper, he discovered a second box containing Emily's journals. She often kept them for story ideas related to her investigative journalism work, scribbling observations and potential leads in the margins. Thumbing through the pages, James noticed a series of dates, contact names, and what looked like coded references to Winston Sinclair's offshore companies. Words like Sinclair Offshore Holdings and Black Diamond Brokerage appeared frequently, accompanied by question marks and underlined phrases like undisclosed exports and anonymous donors. A prickling sensation crawled across the back of his neck. These weren't standard notes for a freelance journalist covering a routine story. They were pieces of a puzzle, a dangerous puzzle. He recalled his father's warnings about meddling in business that didn't concern outsiders. Emily, of course, had never been one to stay silent in the face of potential wrongdoing. Tucked into the back flap of the journal was a single slip of paper with a handwritten address: 57 Willow Glen Road, Montauk. James recognized the location as a remote property Winston had acquired years ago, rumored to be used for discreet business retreats. The corners of the slip were dog-eared, as if Emily had carried it around for a while. Clutching the journal and the slip of paper, James sank onto the dusty wooden floor. Realization weighed heavily on him. Emily hadn't left simply out of frustration or a sense of emotional neglect. She was running from something far more sinister. She must have believed that Winston's misdeeds could swallow them both if she stayed. Perhaps she feared that if James knew the full truth and confronted his father, it would lead to violence, disgrace, or worse. A surge of guilt and protectiveness coursed through him. He had been so absorbed in his business expansions, in fulfilling his father's expectations of success, that he failed to see the toll it was taking on Emily. If she'd felt alone, carrying the burden of such dangerous knowledge, how frightened she must have been. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Glancing at the screen, he saw Robert Patterson's name. Robert was more than just a best friend. He was practically family, having stood by James through thick and thin for years. Yet lately, James had found reasons to suspect Robert's involvement in Emily's disappearance. Private investigator Harvey had revealed that Robert and Emily had been in frequent contact before she left. "Hey," James answered, still reeling from his discovery. "You sound off. Everything okay?" Robert's voice was tinged with worry. James blew out a tense breath. "I'm at the Brooklyn townhouse. Found some notes Emily left behind. She was investigating my father, Robert. She had addresses, references to shell companies. I also found a specific address in Montauk. I want to check it out." Robert hesitated. "Montauk? You think Emily might have gone there looking for evidence?" "It's possible. Harvey mentioned it too. Seems like Dad used the place for more than just weekend retreats. I'm heading there tomorrow morning. I'd feel better if you came with me." There was a brief pause on the line. "All right," Robert said finally. "Text me the details, and I'll meet you. We'll figure this out." Ending the call, James gazed around the now silent townhouse. He tried to imagine Emily crouched on the living room floor, scribbling notes, her face a mask of worry. Had she paused to look at their wedding photos before slipping out the door for good? The thought crushed him. She had risked everything to protect him from Winston's poisonous legacy, and he'd been too blind to see it. Resolute, James tucked the journal and slip of paper into his briefcase, careful to preserve Emily's handwriting as if it were sacred text. He flicked off the lights, leaving the townhouse in darkness, and stepped back onto the quiet Brooklyn street. Outside, the sun hung low, bathing the buildings in a golden glow as though offering a fleeting sign of hope. He climbed into his car, mind racing over what lay ahead. If Montauk held the answers, or even a shred of tangible proof, he would stop at nothing to find it. For years, James had built his empire by negotiating high-stakes deals and outmaneuvering competitors. Now, for the first time, he would use those instincts not for profit or power, but for the woman he loved. And as he drove away, an unspoken prayer lingered in the air. Please, let Emily still be safe. Let me find her before my father's secrets destroy us both. In that singular moment, James felt a potent blend of fear, regret, and raw determination. The pieces were indeed starting to fall into place, but whether they would lead to salvation or catastrophe was a question only the future could answer. The windswept coastline of Montauk carried an air of desolation that morning, the sky a steely grey as foamy waves crashed against the jagged rocks. James arrived first, parking his sleek black SUV near a small wooden gate labelled with the number 57. The property beyond looked unremarkable, an unassuming single-story beach house, salt-stained from years of Atlantic storms. Robert pulled up a short while later, stepping out of his car with a concerned nod. Together, they cautiously approached the house. Windows were boarded from the inside, a chain hung loosely on the front door, and no signs of life were visible. Strange that Winston would own a place like this, Robert muttered, scanning the surroundings. James tried the doorknob, locked. After a moment's hesitation, he used a small crowbar stashed in his trunk to pry the door open. Inside, the house was sparse, the musty air suggesting it hadn't been inhabited in some time. The living room contained a couch draped with a dusty sheet, and the kitchen counters were bare except for a few abandoned mugs. Robert flipped on the flashlight app on his phone. This must have been a discreet meeting place, he said, shining the beam across the walls. If Emily came here, it was probably to find or hide evidence. They searched methodically, checking drawers, cupboards, even the loft space. Eventually, James discovered a hidden compartment under a loose floorboard. Inside lay a small steel box. He carefully cracked it open, revealing stacks of documents, a couple of old photos, and a flash drive. Jackpot, Robert breathed, reaching for the papers. The documents were corporate contracts stamped with names James recognized, subsidiaries of Sinclair Enterprises from decades ago, detailing shipments labeled as medical supplies but accompanied by suspiciously large dollar amounts. The photos depicted Winston shaking hands with foreign officials in militarized zones. The flash drive, presumably, contained digital files that could expose the entire operation. James's stomach twisted with nausea. Emily must have found all this. She must have realized the consequences if this ever got out. The emotions roiling inside him were part outrage, part remorse. Emily had borne this burden alone, likely to protect him. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Instinctively, James and Robert froze, exchanging alarmed glances. A shadow fell across the boarded window, and the door rattled. Within seconds, two men in dark suits stormed in, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them," barked one of the intruders, pointing a pistol at Robert. The other seized James's arm, yanking the documents out of his grip. Adrenaline surged through James. "Who are you?" he demanded. One man smirked. "Let's just say we're here to ensure that certain information remains confidential. You're trespassing on private property." Robert locked eyes with James, silently urging him to stay calm. If Winston had sent these men, Their orders might be to retrieve the evidence and eliminate liabilities. The tension crackled in the air. Slowly, James placed his hands up. The documents and flash drive were confiscated in a matter of seconds. "Now, be good boys," the lead man sneered, stepping back toward the door. "Whatever you thought you'd find here is none of your concern." Before James or Robert could protest, the men slammed the door shut, leaving them in a swirl of dust and panic. By the time they made it outside, an unmarked black sedan was peeling away, gravel spraying in its wake. The most damning evidence against Winston was gone, snatched out of their hands in a heartbeat. Yet, even though the men had taken the physical proof, James had seen enough. Emily's sacrifice began to make tragic sense, but one question still tormented him. Where was she now? And had these men caught up to her too? In the wake of the Montauk ambush, James felt a new urgency. Winston's reach was obviously long and formidable. If Emily was still hiding, she might be in more danger than ever. Even more disturbing was the thought that Winston could have already silenced her. But James refused to give in to despair. He believed Emily was alive. Back in Manhattan, James met again with Harvey Wilkins in an anonymous diner off a quiet street. Over cups of bitter coffee, James recounted the events in Montauk. Harvey listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in a small notepad. "You're certain these men were Winston's goons?" Harvey asked. "Who else would they be?" Robert responded, sitting beside James. "The timing is too perfect." James's face was grim. "They took everything, the flash drive, the documents. We're back to square one, except now Winston knows we're onto him." Harvey tapped his pen against the table thoughtfully. "He's sending a warning, but I might have a lead. A former associate of your father's, someone who turned whistleblower years ago, contacted me. His name is Alan Westwood. He claims to have knowledge of Winston's more illicit deals." "Did Emily contact him?" James asked, hope flickering in his eyes. Harvey shrugged. "He wouldn't say, but he's agreed to meet." They arranged to see Alan in a remote motel near the outskirts of the city later that evening. When they arrived, they found a middle-aged man with a weary expression, pacing anxiously in the parking lot. The moment he spotted them, he beckoned them inside his cramped room, quickly locking the door behind him. Alan's voice trembled as he spoke. "I used to be Winston's right-hand man in the offshore accounts. I got out when I realized I couldn't live with the guilt. If Emily reached out to me, it must have been about the same dirt I have. She was persistent, said she needed proof that James wasn't involved." James's heart lurched. Emily had been trying to clear his name, not condemn it. "Do you know where she went, Alan? Please, I need to find her." Alan hesitated, then placed a small USB drive on the rickety table. "I gave her a copy of these files for her own safety. She said she had a contact who could keep her hidden until she figured out what to do. Something about wanting to talk to some high-level people at the Department of Justice quietly." James leaned forward, palms sweaty. "Where?" "She didn't say exactly, but she did mention heading south, possibly to Virginia or the Carolinas. She was trying to connect with an old friend in investigative journalism, Heather Caldwell. If you find Heather, you might find Emily." A wave of relief washed over James. At least he had a name, a direction. Robert gently took the USB drive from the table. "We need to guard this with our lives." Alan nodded, anxiety etched into his features. "Listen, Winston has people everywhere. Emily might be living off the grid. But if you really love her, you'll find a way." James stood up, determination flaring in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes. She's risked her life to protect me, to protect us. I'm done letting fear stop me. I'm going to find her, and I'm going to bring her home." Outside in the cool night air, James breathed deeply for the first time in weeks. Hope was fragile, but it was alive, and for James Sinclair, that was enough to keep fighting. Armed with Alan Westwood's tip, James and Robert began the search for Heather Caldwell, a seasoned investigative journalist known for her work in exposing political corruption. After countless phone calls, digital leads, and whispered rumors, they finally discovered that Heather had recently relocated to an isolated cottage near Roanoke, Virginia. Without delay, they boarded James's private jet, bound for Virginia. During the flight, James found himself reflecting on the man he used to be, a driven billionaire who valued power and profit above all. Emily had seen both his ambition and his vulnerability, loving him despite it all. Now, he realized how often he had overlooked her needs and fears. He vowed silently that if he found her, he would spend the rest of his life making things right. Upon landing, they rented a modest SUV and drove through winding country roads, passing fields and old barns, until they reached Heather's address. A small wooden cottage with peeling paint came into view, surrounded by towering pine trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was inside. They approached, cautiously. James knocked, his heart pounding like a war drum. Moments later, a woman in her late 30s, with tousled auburn hair, opened the door, her sharp eyes assessing them. "May I help you?" "Are you Heather Caldwell?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She nodded. "Who's asking?" "I'm James Sinclair. Emily is my wife." He paused, voice trembling. "Please, I just need to know if she's safe." A flicker of recognition crossed Heather's face. She stepped aside, letting them in. The cottage's interior was warm, filled with mismatched furniture and stacks of newspapers. "I haven't seen Emily in months," Heather admitted once they were seated. She reached out, looking for a safe haven and possible contacts with the DOJ. "I helped her with some connections, but she never showed up here. I assumed she found another way." James's shoulders slumped with disappointment. "Then I'm back to square one." Heather considered him for a moment. "Look, Emily cares about you a great deal. She told me she wanted to protect you from your father's sins. She was determined to bring Winston to justice without dragging you down. If she hasn't contacted me, it might mean she's close to finalizing her story or she's in trouble. Possibly both." Robert handed Heather the USB drive Alan had given them. "Can you ensure this finds its way to the right people in case something happens to us?" Heather's eyes flicked between them. Then she took the drive carefully. "I have my channels, but are you sure you want to do this?" James nodded resolutely. "If it means ending Winston's criminal network and ensuring Emily can return safely, yes. I'll sacrifice my inheritance, my business, anything. I just want Emily back." A hint of admiration softened Heather's demeanor. "Then you might want to check the safe houses along the eastern seaboard that journalists sometimes use. There's one in North Carolina. Emily might have tried to hole up there." With a renewed sense of purpose, James thanked Heather and rose to leave. Outside, Robert placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We're close, James. She's out there, and we'll find her." James glanced at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set in a blaze of orange and red. Redemption felt within reach, but every hour counted. He silently prayed that Emily was still safe, and that somehow she could forgive him for letting her face this peril on her own. James and Robert set out on an exhaustive search, driving from Virginia into the heart of North Carolina. At each small town, They discreetly inquired about any visiting journalist matching Emily's description. They followed faint leads, old tips, and vague rumors until they arrived in the coastal town of Beaufort, famous for its maritime history and secluded inlets. It was near dusk when they pulled into a quiet street flanked by pastel-colored cottages. The address they had obtained, an old journalist's safe house, was a modest bungalow hidden behind Spanish moss and an overgrown garden. With hearts pounding, they knocked on the door. To their immense relief, the door opened just a crack, and there stood Emily. Her eyes widened in utter shock. James felt his breath hitch. She looked thinner, paler, but still as breathtaking as the day she walked out. For a moment, no words passed between them, only the crackling electricity of raw emotion. Finally, she stepped back, ushering them inside as she glanced anxiously around. "How did you find me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. James swallowed hard, tears threatening to cloud his vision. "I couldn't let you vanish, Emily. I needed to know why you left, and if you were okay." Robert lingered by the door, giving them space. Emily's expression was torn between relief and fear. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "It's too dangerous. Winston is—" "I know everything," James interrupted, stepping closer. "The arms deals, the blackmail, all of it. You were trying to protect me from the fallout, but I refuse to hide any more. If exposing Winston is the only way to keep you safe, then let's do it together." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "You could lose everything." James cupped her face gently. "I don't care about the money, the reputation, any of it. None of it matters if I don't have you." For a moment they stood there, the weight of 6 months of separation collapsing between them. Emily collapsed into his arms, sobbing softly. Robert discreetly turned away, granting them a semblance of privacy. In halting sentences, Emily explained how she had discovered Winston's dealings while investigating corruption. Realizing her father-in-law's potential wrath, she chose to vanish, rather than risk James being implicated or harmed. She tried to gather concrete proof to hand over to federal authorities, hoping to exonerate James in the process. But leads dried up, and men in dark suits started following her. She retreated to safe houses and small towns, surviving on borrowed time. "We can still bring Winston down," Robert interjected. "We have a journalist contact, Heather Caldwell, and an ex-associate of Winston's, Alan Westwood. They'll help us blow this open." Emily nodded, determination rekindling in her eyes. "Then let's do it. Together." In that cramped bungalow, a new alliance was formed. Emily's phone buzzed in the corner. Calls from unknown numbers, messages from hidden sources. With Robert's help, they hashed out a plan. Gather all remaining evidence, coordinate with Heather Caldwell for publication, and notify the DOJ. The clock was ticking, but for the first time, they were united. As James drew Emily into another embrace, the air was charged with a cautious hope. Their worlds, romantic, corporate, and criminal, were about to collide in a spectacular reckoning. But they would face it side by side, bound by the promise of a love worth risking everything for. In a coordinated effort, Emily, James, and Robert spent the next 2 weeks finalizing their plan. Heather Caldwell arranged a secure channel with high-level officials at the Department of Justice, ensuring they could dump Winston Sinclair's illicit records without interception. Meanwhile, Emily double-checked every piece of evidence, verifying the authenticity of every transaction, every photograph, and every record of Winston's under-the-table deals. On a crisp morning in Manhattan, James held a press conference that would become the turning point of his life. The iconic steps of the Sinclair Tower were crowded with reporters, cameramen, and onlookers who'd heard rumors that the elusive billionaire was about to make a groundbreaking announcement. As James stepped up to the microphone, his heart thrummed with equal measures of fear and resolve. He cleared his throat, scanning the sea of faces. Cameras flashed, questions buzzed in the air. From the corner of his eye, he spotted Emily, hidden amidst the crowd. Her dark hair tucked under a simple hat. Their eyes met, and she offered a small nod of support. "Good morning," James began, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic tremor. "I stand before you today, not as a mere businessman, but as a man who values truth above all else. Over the past few months, I've discovered evidence that my father, Winston Sinclair, was involved in serious criminal activities, including illegal arms trading and money laundering, activities that were hidden within the larger Sinclair empire." The crowd broke into frantic murmurs. James took a deep breath and continued, "I have provided all relevant documentation to the Department of Justice. As of this morning, Winston Sinclair is under investigation by federal authorities. Let me be clear. I had no prior knowledge of these dealings. However, as the current head of Sinclair Enterprises, I take responsibility for righting these wrongs. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from my role as CEO, pending a full internal audit and federal investigation." A storm of stunned gasps erupted. Questions flew at him, but James held up a hand for silence. "I also want to address something more personal," he said, voice cracking. "My wife, Emily Sinclair, she left me months ago because she discovered these secrets and feared for our safety. Emily, if you can hear this, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not listening, for not being there when you needed me, and for putting you in this impossible situation in the first place." He paused, eyes scanning, until they found her in the throng. Emily inhaled sharply, tears brimming as James continued, "You sacrificed everything to protect me. I should have fought by your side from the start. I love you, and I'm asking, begging, for your forgiveness." An electric hush fell over the crowd, and then, in a move that shocked everyone, Emily stepped forward, pushing past reporters until she reached the front. Camera shutters clicked wildly as she stood just a few feet away from James. She swallowed, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to leave you, but I couldn't bear seeing you destroyed by your father's sins." James's eyes misted. Without hesitation, he dropped the microphone and bounded down the steps. Ignoring the flash of cameras and the roar of the crowd, he enveloped Emily in a tender embrace. When he finally pulled away, he whispered into the microphone, "I love you, Emily, and I will spend every day proving it to you." Reporters cheered. Social media lit up instantly with live footage of the tearful reunion. Emily gazed at James, tears streaming down her cheeks, and managed a soft, "I forgive you." The crowd erupted in applause as the couple clung to each other, their bond restored. It was a moment that would live forever in media headlines. Yes, but for James and Emily, it marked something far more profound, a second chance, forged in the crucible of danger and heartache, but sealed with love on the steps of Sinclair Tower. And so, our rollercoaster tale ends with the greatest triumph of all, love prevailing over deception, danger, and pride. James Sinclair renounced his gilded empire to save the woman he treasured more than riches or reputation. Emily found her faith rewarded when the man she loved finally fought alongside her. In a world where secrets fester and power corrupts, their reunion stands as a beacon of hope, proof that redemption is always possible when guided by honesty and devotion. If you found this story as gripping and emotionally charged as we did, please show your support. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more epic tales of love, mystery, and courage. Every thumbs up and subscribe helps us bring you more stories that stir the heart and spark the imagination. Join us next time for another unforgettable journey. Thank you for watching. And remember, love conquers all.